WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. Spring is sprung. We got the Orioles out on the field, people throwing lacrosse sticks around, as well as, even a little football draft coming up next week. But we still have serious Maryland politics going on around here. All of our Baltimore Positive coverage brought to you by our friends at Fadley's. We're hoping to get back down there for a crab cake. You know, I'm doing a crab cake tour here this summer. There'll be a lot more information and beer coming forward on that as the weeks go along. But you can order those crab cakes from anywhere in the world at Fadley's, as well as our friends at State Fair and El Guapo. Next month, we're back over there in the county. We're going to do it outdoor. We're going to do it socially distanced. I don't know what Don's got up his sleeve for a guest appearance on this one, but Don, you have dubbed the new panel, and we've had this group together in many forms and fashions over the last 2.5 years. This is one of your favorite segments. I'm going to let you lead the way.
One of my favorite segments, a segment that we call the Insiders, because I can't think of 3 reporters statewide who really know the ins and outs of what's happening in Annapolis better than Pam Wood from the Baltimore Sun, Brian Sears from the Daily Record, and Josh Kurtz, editor-in-chief at Maryland Matters. Welcome, guys and gals. Welcome back to Baltimore Positive.
Good morning. Thank you.
Isn't this a lot better coming on the show where you all get to hear from Moeller one time than individually for an hour a month
off
the air where he just bleeds your ears? Now when he calls, you just do it publicly and it's all good.
Hey, I never called them. Let's be
until you're retired.
Oh, they called me.
And then you wanted to know what was going on, and that's why you're calling them now.
Exactly. Hey, Brian, before we get too far, all of your loyal readers and social media followers, we need a twin update, man. We need a twin update. I know we have mommy and daddy masks, so what's the latest on the twins?
We are, the latest is we're 30 weeks out. That puts us about 4 to 8 weeks before we hit our window. We're looking at somewhere between 34 and 38 weeks. I think my bride is pulling for 36 weeks. She's now officially hit that point where she's about ready to evict. And most of the stuff around here, I feel like my list keeps getting longer, but if I'm being honest, like, you know, things like the nursery and some of the stuff that I've been working on mostly during the weekends because of session really is coming together, and I think we're about ready for these little hooligans to show up.
Well, I want anybody who is watching on Facebook or YouTube, take a good look at Brian Sears right now, because in about 3 or 4 months he's going to look quite different when he's operating on 1 or 2 hours a night. But Brian, we all wish you well and wish mom well and good luck. Often, as someone who enjoys twins each and every day as 2 5-year-old grandchildren, you're in for a journey.
Donna, you know, the only thing I worry about is I don't have any hair. I'm going into this without hair. So what do I start pulling out now? Like, is it teeth? Is it dentures for me now?
You can have some of mine.
Well, as we always say, remember the Kate Amara mantra: earplugs, earplugs. Earplugs.
Kate has been very good. She and I have texted quite a few times. I've gone to her with some crazy twin questions. So
yeah, she is the expert. So guys, welcome again. Hey Josh, I'm going to start with you and then ask Pam and Brian to weigh in. You recently wrote an article that caught my attention. You said, for better or worse, the General Assembly is devolving into Congress. What did you mean? What did you see? And is that a really bad development for our state? And then when you're done, I'm going to ask Brian and Pam to jump in and share their observations as well.
Well, I don't know if it's quite developed and devolved into Congress yet, but it's definitely become more nakedly partisan. And, you know, as time goes on, you're just seeing more and more partisan battles. More party line votes on the House and Senate floor, more really kind of angry debates with a partisan edge. I think part of that is just, you know, the evolution of the state's politics. Part of it is the fact that both chambers are under relatively new management, and the presiding officers are, in the Senate, case of the Senate, Bill Ferguson is considerably more liberal than his predecessor, Mike Miller. And in the House, I think Speaker Adrian Jones is, you know, more liberal than Speaker Bush in subtle ways. The Republican caucuses are moving to the right. The Democratic caucuses, the rank and file, are moving to the left. So inevitably, there's just going to be more partisanship, and that's what we wrote about the other day.
Feels to me like some of it's theater, you know, at the U.S. level,
right.
That it's, if I'm going to get reelected in, let's say, Dundalk or I have to behave this way in order to keep that vote, because someone else who is a more moderate Republican may come in. That's how I see it. I see it as a lot of theater.
It is. And actually, that's what a couple of senators told us that we interviewed, that, you know, on the floor, it is theater, but committees behind the scenes, you know, people are still rolling up their sleeves and doing the work, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I think the theatrical aspect of it. And before I say this, I want to say I'm an advocate for transparency in all forms, including video. But some are ascribing this to that now the House and the Senate floor sessions every day are on video, and it's great actually. And the committee hearings were always on video. Now the voting sessions are too. But because this is all being recorded, you can see sometimes Republicans in particular, as they're making speeches on a bill or an amendment or talking something down, you can just see where this is going to be on their website later, or this is going to be in their like Facebook ad come 2022. And you know, some people in leadership have reservations about it. That's part of it. I was speaking with someone who compared it to, it was a Senate president that said, compared it to when he was an intern on Capitol Hill, and you have the members of Congress speaking to an empty chamber just because it's on C-SPAN and they know they have video. Now, I'm sure the Republicans in particular would counter that they're just trying to make their point to their people that it's not theatrics, but that is a concern in Annapolis.
Pam, I wrote an article before we jump to you, Brian. I wrote an article about a year ago, particularly tracing the Newt Gingrich era, and Gingrich being the first to really recognize the power of C-SPAN, and that little known factor that this little government run channel of C-SPAN really began to build into those partisan divides. And Brian, you'll remember, going way back to when you were a puppy reporter, I can remember folks saying to me in Baltimore County that when they began, and I agree with Pam, transparency is good, but when they began to televise board meetings, someone said to me, well, board meetings are about to go from an hour and a half to 3 to 4 hours. And boy, did that turn out to be prescient. I mean, it was everyone, when they know they're on camera, feels a need to speak. But Brian, you recently celebrated, and I curse you because it made me feel damn old, but you certainly celebrated 20 years of covering the General Assembly. And I wanted to say it ain't so, Joe. Brian can't have been down there 20 years.
This was my 20th sine die. I mean, look, Don, one of the things I think that there are two other points that I think are worth considering when we talk about what, you know, this thing that's going on in the General Assembly, which is, first, it's been happening for years, despite the fact that they all want to pretend that they're Claude Rains in Casablanca, and they're just shocked that there's partisanship going on the floor of the Senate. It's all 50 miles down the road. But so two of the other things are, we saw a lot more coordination and speaking, especially in the House, from Republicans who were clearly trying to use the imposed time limits of sessions because they were limited to 2 and 3 hours, especially early on because of the pandemic. It becomes to use a football term, Nestor, it becomes clock management. You know, if you stand up and speak on every bill, if you have a lot to say on every bill, if you have a lot of questions on every bill, it means that there are other bills that don't get done. The other point that should be made is that we are seeing this devolve because of what we see in the national politics, which is at the local level, we are seeing this pattern of hyper redistricting where districts are becoming more and more Republican, more and more Democrat. It tends to sort of push the parties both to the edges. I mean, we are now to the point where, you know, folks like Kathy Klausmeyer, who used to be, you know, moderate Democrats used to make up a larger portion of the House and the Senate, Senator Klausmeyer is practically a unicorn in the Maryland Senate and perhaps in the Maryland General Assembly.
We are with Brian Sears, Josh Kurtz, and Pam Wood. We're the Insiders, is dubbed by Don Moeller. I wanted to ask you guys about what's going on in D.C. and Congress as far as the division and how that plays out locally, not just for politics, for, as you said, Pam, maybe somebody wants to put that they said something on the next time they're asking for money. But how often do you, and Brian, maybe even you being there, the senior member in 20 years, but all of you been there a long time, how often is the money talked about on that side and campaigning talked about while we're doing this part of the work in the early part of the year? Because I hear so much about campaigning out of D.C. I don't feel like I hear that as a local person here, but I think deep down, every person there wants to get reelected, especially on the right side of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's why rarely do you ever see somebody willingly drop off, right? But I think at least publicly, nobody wants to talk about that. And publicly, it's that I'm doing the work of the people. I'm representing my constituents. I'm fighting for what I believe in. It's all purity, of course, publicly at least. But it certainly, I'm sure, is in the back of people's minds. But also remember, a lot of times in a state delegate or state Senate seat, you don't need as much money to run. You can win a seat with like $20,000, right? Like, cause you're not going on, TV, you don't need so much. You can come up with a fair amount of money, with your family and your friends and throw in a couple barbecue fundraisers. So I don't know that there's as much pressure on the fundraising part, but it's certainly, one of the factors.
But notoriety only comes when you go to Annapolis and pronounce. Right? It doesn't happen at a barbecue in July. It's only sort of official during this time of the year where you can sort of preen a little bit, right?
Well, like only though if you have really engaged constituents. The vast majority of Marylanders can't even tell you who their delegates or their senators are. I can tell you mine, but I'm a high information voter. A lot of times you only see them when they come to your community meeting or, when they're like back home or maybe you're on their email list. So they get to tell the narrative a lot. And I just, as much as it's bad for the business that we're in, I don't know that people really are following every twist and turn of what's going on in Annapolis.
Yeah, I think that anonymity that Pam is talking about for these members in a kind of twisted way is now contributing to some of the partisanship, because if voters don't know who their legislators are, voters are, to the extent that voters follow politics at all or hear about politics, they're hearing about all the dysfunction on Capitol Hill. And so they're sort of responding to that. And then I think their state lawmakers are sort of responding to that. And so in the state lawmakers' minds, they think, well, that's how I have to perform now, because that's what, the voters are used to.
That's a really interesting point, Josh. I was thinking about it yesterday. A neighbor stopped me walking his dog in front of the house, and he's we're good buds. He's a very, very conservative Republican, and he would tell you that I'm lined up with Fidel Castro. We both exaggerate a bit, but he made a point, and I wonder if this speaks to the ongoing strength of President Biden's approval numbers, which continue to surprise me given the tribal nature of our politics. And I think it might go, Josh, to what you said and what Pam said. Average person doesn't live and breathe this stuff. Pam said she's a high information voter.
I agree with that, by the way, Pam.
Yeah, the five of us, we're looking at websites, we're looking at news feeds. I'm looking at everything on Smart News. We're trying to devour everything. And this person said to me, Don, most people are just trying to make sure their kids are okay, make sure that they can pay the rent, that their credit card bill, make sure they've coordinated carpool with their wife to get their kids to the right games. And I'm wondering, months and months ago, Martin O'Malley said to us on this show, man, this was before the election, I just need a little normal in my life again. And I'm just curious how the three of you are out and about, not just covering Annapolis. Do you sense that there's this great desire for normalcy among voters, sort of tapping into what you're saying, that this partisan stuff, just boring? Just give me some normal.
The sad thing about it is, Donna, depending on who you talk to, and I see a lot of this on my Facebook page and the interactions that I have with folks. As you know, Donna, I have a lot of people on Facebook across the political spectrum, and they all define normalcy a little differently depending on when you talk to them. And so, I mean, I think there are some days where I feel like we've even managed to partisanize and politicize the idea of being normal. I will say this: there are days where I think I'm glad that I hear less from the national political scene about things like, reporters being the enemies of the people. But there are days when you look at the instant messages, the direct messages and the emails I get, and we are really not very far from those days at all.
Well, that's disturbing to hear. And not shocking after the last 4 years. Being a sports journalist for a long time, I've had my share of whack jobs, but I can't imagine what I've seen happen in Michigan at the State House there. All that seemed to avoid us to some degree last year, which I think for all of us in the state felt like, well, maybe this would be the kind of session that everybody would come together and see. We're in the middle of a plague. I'm getting my shot this week. I hope you all have your shots. But it feels like putting this thing together, there would be we're one of the states that's functioning pretty well, against the other 49.
Well, that's interesting because, remember at the start of session, well, of course, the pandemic seemed a lot worse because the vaccines were just getting rolled out. But the session also started with the threat of mobs turning up in Annapolis, which never happened. So there was some of that spillover from January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. And I think we've talked about this some before, but it was just an extraordinary session logistically, and the fact that nobody got sick, I think, is nothing short of miraculous in the sort of State House bubble.
That's one thing, actually, since Josh mentioned it, that's worthy of bringing up, because as Josh and Pam and I were down there a lot. For me, Don, you mentioned my wife being pregnant. So I am my wife's risk exposure. And that was something that was in the front of my mind every day when I was down there. And I will tell you that when we started the session, I looked at the plans and I had a hard time sort of making them fit together in my brain because it was not what I had been used to. But I will tell you that being down there, I thought that what they had in place worked well. There were, in terms of my dealings with the legislature, there was never a time where I felt that the plans that they had in place in any way put me or my colleagues at risk. Pam will tell you, she and I have had conversations about different risk factors in the State House, and overall, I felt pretty safe going in every day and not having to think about the idea that I might be bringing something home to my wife.
Well,
go ahead, Pam.
I was just going to say, getting back to what we were talking about partisanship and everything, and lack of collegiality, those safety procedures, they were weird and odd, but I felt like I was in a very controlled environment and that my risk was limited, and I was only willing in my life to accept a certain amount of risk, and I used it all up going to the State House, right. But it was fine. But a lot of lawmakers talked about how it made it very difficult for them to hash things out and talk, that the House of Delegates was split into two chambers. And people in the annex chamber at Maryland Matters, Danielle Gaines did a great story about it the other day, how difficult it was and the challenges of being separated. Some people said they didn't get to speak. And then, these bill hearings were held all over Zoom, and we all know how awful that is, right? To do it all the time. And you couldn't have coffees or bump into people in the hallway. And some lawmakers felt that there wasn't this just honest, you couldn't even build friendships, people of different parties are great friends down there. But you couldn't build that this year. So on one hand, the health, risks were minimized, but did that, come at a cost of collegiality?
In a lot of ways,
Yeah.
what Pam is saying is we saw very encapsulated in the State House. I mean, even the press corps was split into multiple rooms. We saw encapsulated there what we've seen over the last 14 months in society at large, which is this physical distancing from other human beings. We're social creatures. It really makes a lot of what we do very difficult.
Well, again, for those of you tuning in, we're with Brian Sears of the Daily Record, Josh Kurtz, Maryland Matters, Pam Wood, Baltimore Sun. We call them the Insiders. In the few minutes that we have left, I want to go around and, Brian, maybe we start with you this time. A lot happened this session: police reform, sports betting, pandemic relief, voter reform. When other states are trying to make it harder to vote, Maryland's trying to make it easier to vote. If you had to pick one or two issues, and I'm going to ask each one of you this and go around the table, that 10 or 15 years from now, when we look back at the 2021 session and we say the action that the General Assembly took in these areas has had a lasting impact on the state, what would they be, Brian?
Look, I think the focus almost at every turn on issues of equity it probably will be seen as the beginning of something in Maryland. I don't think that this is the end of the conversation. This was a very large step in the conversation. We saw it touch literally just about everything that the General Assembly did, from pandemic relief, even to the sports betting bill, and we saw change. A bill that came out of the House that was designed to ensure that minority owners would get not only a seat at the table, but be able to have a piece of the pie and build generational wealth. We saw that bill come out of the Senate, which with improvements that I think I think my colleagues would agree really took another step towards ensuring that equity among minority owners on a couple of different ways that we hadn't talked about before. And so I think equity is really going to be the thing in 15 years that we might look back on and see that this was the beginning of something.
Pam?
Yeah.
What are we going to be talking about 10 or 15 years from now?
Yeah, kind of in the same vein, I think actually the single issue we're going to be talking about is the policing reforms. And, time will tell if they got it right or if it fell short or went too far. But lawmakers have been working on this for years and didn't get traction. Talk to Senator Jill P. Carter and she will tell you about her fights that went nowhere for years and years. And finally, the time has come where they did more than nibble around the edges of police accountability and transparency in understanding when police are disciplined. It's just been small steps before. And this year they did a lot. I had some great coverage from my colleagues, Tim Prudente and Jessica Anderson, about now how police departments are going to implement these new discipline systems and what it means for them. So I think that package of bills has the potential to be the most transformative thing they did this year by far.
6 years after Freddie Gray, by the way. So just, and while Minnesota's on fire right now, right? So, Josh
Kurtz, what will Maryland Matters be writing about as significant 10 years from now when they look back?
Well, one of the most significant things is a bill that actually died because the two sides got into a snit with each other in the final hours, and that was a big and consequential climate change bill. And instead of compromising, the House and Senate chairman just had a feud instead.
Yeah.
Now,
Josh, what happened there? Wait a minute, I got the three of you because before we run out of time, what happened there? Because that seemed like a done deal to me all the way through, and it blew up. What happened, Josh?
Well, a part of it was the two sides disagreed on several key policy points, both how aggressive, what steps to take, but really in the final hours there didn't seem to be any desire for compromise. And one chairman, Kumar Barve in the House, was dismissive of the Senate. The chairman, Paul Pinsky in the Senate, was dismissive of the House. And I think environmentalists thought up until maybe 3 hours before Siney died that they were going to come together in the end, and they didn't. And I think the state is poised to address climate change in meaningful ways going forward, but this 1 year delay is not insignificant, and it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and now we're days out. You know, the session is behind us, and Chairman Barve is still on Twitter defending the House's position on this. So one would think like, oh, okay, let cooler heads prevail. Maybe they'll work something out, come back next year. But you know, at this point, there's a long way to go because that relationship is damaged for sure.
Yeah. Were any of you surprised? I'm going to focus on the House for a minute because, and again, full disclosure, Speaker Jones is a friend of mine and been an outstanding legislator for many, many years. I don't know that even her closest friends would have predicted how forceful she could be. Brian, I'm going to start with you because you've covered her a long time. You've known her forever. Did her ability to slide into the role of speaker surprise you at all, Brian?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about sliding into the role originally, I mean, I think that surprised everybody. I mean, she's growing into the role, I think, to some degree, and I think the session really kind of showed that because there was a lot of feeling, especially from senators, both Democrats and Republicans, that on some key issues that they felt that the Senate just didn't fight hard enough, especially on issues of police reform. And meanwhile, over in the House really sort of like drew their line and stood there. And in the end, on things like, again, on the issue of police reform, they got a lot, if not most of what they wanted. I mean, it really, it really was sort of a testament to how the two chambers operated. And certainly I think, Adrian Jones, who I think probably personally has a distaste for conflict. I mean, look, I mean, I've known her going back to covering Baltimore County. I mean,
right.
I've always known her to be a nice person, not somebody that I've ever seen get into a lot of fights. And and some of these issues between the two chambers can be best described as fights.
I will say though, Brian said that Speaker Jones maybe doesn't, wants to avoid conflict, and she's not a loud, like vocal leader. She's not like a Mike Miller, like big presence, but the speaker will devastate you with like just one line, like just subtly stated. And, she's very good at like picking her moment and picking her words. And she, can just like cut you down in a moment if you're out of line, which is interesting.
Absolutely. In the minute or two we have left, we can't give short shrift to the Senate. Josh Kurtz, describe Senate President Ferguson's leadership now. First full session. I mean, not a normal session, still in a pandemic, but talk about our friend, the senator from Fells Point.
Well, he's high energy. He's sort of committed to being collaborative. I think the dynamics between the two chambers are so different, and I think my colleagues really got the House chamber right under Speaker Jones. I'm still trying to kind of figure out all the dynamics in the Senate. I think Speaker Jones really drove the agenda in her chamber, and I think President Ferguson, sort of let others do a lot of the work and take a lot of the credit.
I think the Senate president, it was kind of interesting. Things really held together pretty well for most of the 90 days. The one thing that we had not seen was the Senate president handling a real sine die, not the 19-day early event that we saw last year. And on the last day of session, the tactics change a lot. There are a lot of, especially with the minority party who tries to they will slow walk everything because, again, it is clock management. And I do think that there were a couple of moments where things got chippy on the floor and the Senate president got chippy from the rostrum. And it was something that I don't think we had seen in the previous 89 days. But again, this was a new, it's much easier to watch. I think when you're just Senator Ferguson sitting in the floor, it's much easier to handle a sine die than when you are Senate President Ferguson on the rostrum and you're the one that's trying to direct traffic and keep the bills moving across the desk.
Nestor, you love social studies class.
Well, yeah, we got to get, it's amazing. We've done a half an hour with you guys, and we haven't said two words. I don't think the words Larry and Hogan have come up here at any point in 30 minutes. So I feel like we need to have you guys back at some point and go through that, because we didn't even get to that part of what's going on in Annapolis.
And a little gubernatorial politics, right, Nestor? We'll bring them back.
Well, I mean, it is about that time of the year. We did have Wes Moore on recently. We had Michael Steele on recently. Everybody's throwing a hat in the ring, so we'll get to that. Brian, always great to see you. Good luck with the family. Josh, same to you out there. And Pam, always reading at the Baltimore Sun and Save Our Sun. We appreciate you.
Thanks for having us.
The Insiders, as dubbed by Don Moeller, our former Baltimore County executive, my former high school guidance coach. It's almost like Schoolhouse Rock without the rock. That's just more like Schoolhouse here. Brian Sears, Josh Kurtz, Pam Wood, and on behalf of former Baltimore County executive Don Moeller, I am Nestor. Together, we are doing Wise Conversations now to replace our intelligent conversations with our new partners at Wise Markets. Eat better, spend less, talk more politics. We are WNST.net, AM 1570. Never stopping talking Baltimore positive.